Episode 65 of the Church Digital podcast, powered by Stadia Church Planting. One of my favorite podcasts this year was actually part of a 3-part podcast series called The Biblical Functions of a Digital-Only Church. And so pre-COVID, pre-coronavirus, before every church in America was essentially a digital-only church, we were having a conversation with a lot of online pastors, 4 or 5 online pastors, talking about what a digital-only church model would be. And so episode 50 was that introductory episode where we took a book, Larry Walkemeyer, Todd Wilson's The Multiplication Flywheel, and talked about it. The biblical functions of church as referenced in Acts, as referenced in the Bible, and talked about how these things could be executed in a digital-only space where it did not require physical footprint. It would only require digital virtual services. Can we do it? You know, it's interesting. We talked about worship. We talked about teaching. We talked about giving. We talked about some of those easy ones, what I would call easy ones, in the first episode, and that's episode 50. In this episode, we're now 65, man, we really started digging into what I thought was going to be a slam dunk easy one, but we ended up parking on it for a long time. What does fellowship look like in a digital-only church? Now, what's interesting is the reality of where we are today in church. Like, we are understanding what church looks like, and we're actually feeling the tension because while the physical church is out there creating all of this content, and we are content beasts at this point, as churches are getting on 5, 6, 7 times a week, multiple times a day, between devotionals and sermons and devotional thoughts, sermonettes, all this content, worship sets being generated online. What we're really seeing is that while this content is effective, what we're missing in this coronavirus season is really communication. It's relationships. It's engaging with people in a digital way, because there is no other way for us to communicate. And so what does it look like to fellowship? What you're going to listen to is a conversation that happened way back in probably February, before the whole COVID thing exploded. This was before even the Exponential Conference. We referenced it in the podcast. Before the Exponential Conference, early March. And so you're hearing language of what does it look like? And really the themes that we're talking about are as relevant today to every church across America, because we're all digital at this point, and we all need to figure out how to create fellowship digitally, because there is no other way right now other than digitally. So here we are, episode 65 of the Church Digital Podcast, part 2 of the conversation of biblical functions of a digital church. We're bringing into the conversation Jason Morris, Global Innovations Pastor, Westside Family; Joey Santos, Christ Church, online pastor there; Ian Kirk, Generations Community Church, is an online pastor. We're bringing in somebody new, Jade Earhart, who is a video game church, digital church, developing it into a church. He's in a church planning system. Jade Earhart with Love Clan, and myself, Jeff, with the Church Digital. In an episode that we're just simply calling, as I said, Biblical Functions of a Digital Church, Part 2. Parentheses, of 3. Episode 3 is coming soon, but right now, Part 2. Here y'all go. I interviewed Ed Stetzer on the podcast yesterday, and I was like, nothing's changed. Nothing ever changes. Ed, what do we have to do to actually change? We know we need to change. We know that the stats are bad, but nothing, there's no catalyst. We say, yes, we need to change. We're at fault. We need to, but we never actually get there. The Big C Church never turns the corner. So anyway, awesome. Hey, I'm excited about the podcast. So Ray bolted on us. God bless him.
Sorry.
I appreciate you for giving up a Saturday to do this, and I want to thank Jade for jumping in to filling in some of the holes here a little bit on the podcast. So just to kind of lay the groundwork and remind. By the way, the podcast, the first interview that we did for parts 1 through 4 or whatever, that's out now. It actually did very well. I mean, I'm not surprised digital church is so novel of a concept at this point. I think I'm getting a lot of traffic just because people are like, ooh, something new. I don't know if they're for or against. I haven't gotten much hate mail on it, but it's a thing. Not as much as
Lucky.
yeah, not as much as Jade's podcast. Man, that's still shooting. I still get a lot of listens. Jade, you're quickly becoming one of the top 5 off that one, by the way. And it's probably but it's a bunch of people who hate you, so it works out.
I get hate mail.
So
right.
if somebody sends you hate mail, do you pass that along to your guests? I mean, if you got hate mail on some of my podcasts, I would want to know so I can at least respond or something.
No, I get the hate mail. They come to me. They go find me and they give me the hate mail. No, you, the thing you said, you're dumb, big dumb, stupid.
I'm just asking questions here. You can't fault me for asking questions. It's not my fault this guy wants to launch a digital church reaching video gamers for Christ.
He's prodding.
What are you thinking?
He's in there prodding. Hey, say something. Yeah. Thanks, Jimmy Fallon.
I got to tell you, it's the first time in my life I've been confused for Jimmy Fallon. I kind of like it. It's got a nice feel to it.
Yeah, it's the face.
That's exactly what I was going
couldn't.
for.
Okay, hold on.
It's like I'm looking at Jimmy Fallon. Yeah.
So remember, in context of this, now there's church online, but it's broadcasting the church services online, and that's physical church ministry that's happening in virtual or digital spaces. Maybe we can use examples of that, but the core of what I want this conversation isn't physical church doing virtual ministry. It's something more in line of what Jade's doing with the video game stuff, where it's holistically aimed at virtual first that may roll into physical. So questions like, biblically, can a church do, and this will probably be the opening question, what does fellowship look like? What does disciple making look like? What does compassion look like? Justice. What do these things look like in a biblical context, in a digital only or digital first expression of church? Because the exercise we're wrestling with is not, can it be physical? We know it can be physical, but can a digital church kind of meet that expectation that the Bible puts forth? And a couple of these, I'm like, I really don't know how that's going to work. So this might be an interesting conversation. It'll be interesting to see where we get. The last podcast was easy compared to this one, I think. So thanks y'all for coming back. Any questions on anything else before we get started?
I do have one question because
Yes, sir.
I think when you say church, you're not talking about a church service. You're talking about all of the facets of church, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So let me define that. With a digital church, what I'm suggesting is we wipe the slate clean of expectations and go back to the biblical mandate and as building blocks, and then build a model of church. Last time we talked about 20 minutes of worship. Is that effective? Is that the only way of biblical worship? Is musical worship the only way? Mm-hmm. Bible talks about other things. We talked about the message. Is the 40-minute sermon the most effective? Do we even need a sermon? Is there even, what could teaching look like? You say, oh yeah, we can go back to like Paul does and write, and then like everyone and whoever listens to the podcast, heads explode, but nobody sends Jason, hate mail because Jason's, not 26 or 27. How old are you, Jake?
Whatever. Old enough. I just have people old enough nowadays. Like whatever. Whatever you think.
It's like Jason says something entirely controversial, and the fact that he's like bald with a goatee and kids, everybody says that's awesome. Jade Earhart says something borderline controversial.
Wait! But it's a podcast. They can't even see him
when he says it. Oh, they know.
They can't even see him. For all they know, I could be. Let's have a young voice. The heck.
That's awesome. So does that answer that question?
Yeah, it does. Because there was a couple of moments in the last podcast where I was a little confused as to what we were referring to. And what I like what you're doing is basically the church service for millennia has been used as the primary tool to get the church work done. And what you're doing is you're dissecting it. And you're saying, okay, what was used before as a church tool to do church work, the service, we're going to take pieces of that out, and we're going to see if those pieces can be done digitally. Am I following you correctly?
You are
and whether that,
right on it.
Whether that means that it ends up looking like a church service or not doesn't even matter if we are accomplishing the functions of a church, not a church service, of a church, then who cares?
Well, I think it also about because of how the currently is set up is for the church, the physical churches, without the weekend service, nothing else exists. The church doesn't exist, right? So if
well, it shouldn't be that way.
Exactly,
yeah.
Correct.
But they structured this way. Well, like if the weekend service doesn't happen, church doesn't exist. And how it's currently set up, right?
Right.
You know, I was talking with DJ Soto a while back, and he used this phrase. I was talking about, you know, how Stadia, how the Church Digital, how I can help them, you know, with doing some digital church, and trying to figure out how to reproduce guys like him, guys like Jade, who are doing this. And this is what DJ's line was, and I love this. It's time for us to stop recreating church in the virtual space, recreating physical church in the virtual space, and it's time for us to reinvent church for the virtual space.
Exactly.
It's not I want to copy this thing, I want to shove this square peg into a round hole. It's more of, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. You know, let's look at it and figure it out, and now let's recreate it for virtual, held to the biblical standard, but looking different for virtual. Now, and there's pros and there's cons for this. I just did an interview with Ed Stetzer. We rolled it out last week. Ed is not a fan of digital church. Ed is not a fan of church online, and Ed's a fan of Jeff Reed, and I have a great long-standing relationship with the guy, and he was very gracious on the podcast. But even in context of some of the stuff that we're talking about now, like, it was funny. Ed even drew the analogy, and I totally wouldn't do it, but he drew the analogy to the two Muppets that are up in like the upper balcony. You know, the old guys who are like the get off my lawn type guys. You know, that's how Ed painted himself that picture. That wasn't me. That was Ed. But he painted that picture up, and there are people like that. Hey, before we go radically making changes, we need to consider all fronts. And to that end, Ed, I agree with you. And that's part of what this conversation is as we're starting to question new ways to do church, evaluating how a digital-only expression of church is. Let's start dialoguing conversations like this. Let's start pouring into Scripture, finding ways to either agree with the path that we're on, or maybe even to say, hey, you know what, we're not going to make it because of this right here. I don't know that I found the thing that's like that we got to stop yet, but I'm definitely open to those conversations as we're rolling through this podcast, as well as other conversations wrestling with the ecclesiology of a digital church. And thank you, Ed. I love you. You know that. We're good.
Todd Wilson, when we talked, like, same thing. It's like, I don't think I like digital exclusive church. That's different than what you were talking about earlier. And now I'm not sure if I like, it was the same type of thing. And I mean, once we started going through all these things, and specifically even what you're doing here with all of the list of things. And I mean, the reason I brought up this book, right? The Activating the Flywheel, or use what, I don't know exactly what he uses the word activating the flywheel, but it's mobilization of the flywheel. So yeah,
the book is actually the mobilization flywheel.
Yeah. Okay. So, that's what I was using to start the discussion. It's like, look at these things. This is the why, right? We're not putting any whats to these things. This is why we're doing this, why church exists for these things that you've specifically mentioned. So are they possible to do in an exclusively online space or not, you know? And he was open to that because it's like the terminology that he's heard before that he understands. And so for a lot of this stuff, it's like breaking down the why of why something is. And when I just finished a huge study through Acts, right? 6-7 months, like we did once a week, one chapter. And as I went through it, really thinking about it specifically about an exclusively online church, it really does come down to just the why. And that's like almost all of Acts. Every chapter you can see how they're they're getting into the why of church and the why of everything that they're doing. Even like when they're cleaning tables and they're like, why are we doing this? Like, we should be out discipling, you know what I mean? And they're like, oh, because it needs to happen. You know, we're not saying it doesn't need to happen. It's just a what thing. And here's what we need to do instead. And it's just that's how most of church today feels, is like, get back to that why and then focus on what after you know exactly why you want to do it in the first place. So
yeah, if we could get the entire BC's Big C church to figure out their why, to go back to ask that question, we, the church, would be in a far better spot. And so a lot of that, and it's just really the reason why, you know, Stadia started talking to me about, hey, let's create a digital church model. Like, to me, the ecclesiology, the biblical functions, it's first and paramount. It's the most important thing. Like, let's not do something that's off axis. And if we are off axis, man, God, I'm sorry. Like, you know, let's stop that sooner than later, and let's not drag people down a road they shouldn't go down. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's get started through here. We're continuing on the conversation we did last time with most of this panel, plus or minus Ray Armis and Jade swapping in, going through the mobilization flywheel. Now, this is a PDF that's created by Larry Walkemeyer, Todd Wilson, 100-page, ebook, pretty solid here. Exponential Conference Leadership Network both put this out. But what I love, and by the way, they're speaking on this at Expo. Actually, Expo will have already happened, so I will edit that entire reference out because no one will get that or be able to execute on that.
They can buy the digital pass.
Maybe, yeah, you can maybe do the digital pass. So that's a thing. Okay, so we'll put the link to the show notes.
So here's the funny thing: what you just said is that I don't know if you realized it, but you were talking about editing what you were saying because they couldn't attend an event, but the digital pass they could do. I think you're kind of embodying the very conversation we're having.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Had I known there was a digital pass, I would have tied that in to get it.
Yeah.
Out of ignorance, I did not know. Therefore, I don't feel bad. I wasn't making a judgment as much as highlighting my ignorance. So I'll go ahead and keep all this in because that'll be great. All right.
Digital church.
Digital church. Here we go. Here's what we did. Here's what we covered last time. We covered worship, teaching, prayer, and sacraments, the communion, the baptism, things like that. And so you can go. I don't want to rehash that because we got a lot to cover. Episode 50 covers a lot of that on the podcast. But let's go ahead, and I'm going to go in their order here. So number 5 out of, call it 11, number 5 is fellowship. So the question is, in a digital-only expression of worship, what would fellowship look like? Now, fellowship, we're immediately thinking physical church and the gathering together, Sunday services, whatever, maybe fellowship within small group community. In the context of this, it's digital only, but let's utilize our knowledge of digital tools to be inventive. I'm not necessarily driving for any specific model or something as much as asking the question, how can one fellowship in the biblical context of what fellowship means here through a digital church utilizing digital tools? What do y'all think?
Well, the easiest one, of course, is Facebook. We look at our certain digital expression at our church, and our prayer page is actually the most active thing we have. And people are interacting and praying for each other constantly. And, it's not as if digital fellowship is new. I mean, I'm sadly old enough to remember BBS and the bulletin board systems and fellowship happening there. Honestly, fellowship is the easiest digitally, I think, of almost any of it.
That's really interesting because I agree with you. And in the whole BBS thing, man, that you just struck a chord in my heart. Like, I remember those days. Like the 2400 baud modem, like
yes.
Before AOL was AOL, when it was purely dialing into some guy's system. And then you'd get the call waiting call that would click in and screw up or it was even before call waiting where it was just like busy for hours on end because you're, downloading some game or talking to some guy in like Istanbul or whatever. Yeah, I can feel that. But here's the thing, like it's funny where probably the largest criticism we have, and I'll just take Ed. Ed's thing of, the Hebrews 10, 25, 28, somewhere in there, do not do not abandon the gathering of meeting together, some as are in the habit of doing. Ed's famous line, at least famous to me, it does not include electrons and avatars. Gathering together does not include that. So, which is awesome, and I'm actually impressed that he utilized avatars in the right context right there. It was awesome. But what does that mean for us? Like how does community work? How does fellowship work virtually that maybe somebody like Ed or maybe outsiders aren't understanding?
Yeah, I would get to kind of again, I'm gonna say this for pretty much the whole thing. Like, why fellowship? If you know why you're doing it, then you can look at what fills that role. Same thing with any of these things. Like, why is that an important thing? Because even if you look at some of the, like, what happens with Pharisees, is that they'll take something that was given for their benefit. It's something that was given to be a benefit to them, and then they do it legalistically just for the purpose of fulfilling the law, and not really thinking about why something is what it is. And that's seen throughout the New Testament. And there's always this why are you not supposed to eat these things, and this is no, you're looking at this the wrong way. And that happens throughout New Testament as Jesus is really deconstructing what they already know, and asking if they've really thought about those things. So for fellowship, like Acts 2:42, they continually devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayer. And Matthew 18:20, for where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, therefore I'm among them. So what does that look like for us to gather? Yeah, is it gathering the physical location? If it's saying that they're devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, and Jesus is saying that where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I'm among them. That it gets a little hairy, but you really have to wonder what people are thinking if they say that you can't do this online, you can't gather online, because that's what I get is people use these same verses for why you cannot do online. You have to realize what people are saying when they say that, the why behind that.
This actually gets back to what some of the stuff Jason was talking about last week, where it's like when people have challenges. And I think, Ian, you were talking about it. We're talking about it with the communion, the people who are like mailing out the communion. And it's okay. It's okay to do communion long distance as long as the pastor or the church is the one who's doing the postmark to mail it and the pastor's touching it as it goes in the box, which is crazy. Like, okay, crazy. Maybe it's not crazy. It's unique. But in our context, like there are people who would say, yeah, there are currently 6 people gathered on Zoom, having a conversation about God, and trying to do what's best for the church. But God, the Holy Spirit, per Matthew, Jade's reference, God is not among them because they are not breathing the same air molecules. They're not in physical space, and God doesn't work in this. And so even, in those situations, drilling in to rehash some of the stuff Jason was talking about, to get to the specificity of what don't you agree with, like where is the exact challenge of it. I think that's a great line. What's the most unique place where we've seen, because fellowship's is the easy one, I think, really of this list. What's the most unique way that we're seeing fellowship expand? What's something that surprised you? Cutting edge, new idea, new concept. Who's doing something new?
I don't want to like, but I have to, like, when you were talking about DJ Soto, like, I mean, there you go. Like, I love what he's doing, and I'm in his Discord a lot, just looking what's going on. and I joined him for he had a small group basically, and they were doing it in VR chat. So, I walked up as my VR avatar to the robot that was teaching that night, and I was standing next to a bird and a ramen noodle cup, and we, went through a verse in Matthew, like it's a weird thing. Like I get that it's weird to a lot of people, but yeah, it really does kind of go deeper than just am I physically in this location, and what is that? Why is that a thing? Like why does that exist? Because if I can interact with somebody, honestly, it does hit a certain point where you say, well, then what is considered gathering? If somebody is, if somebody's deaf, are they being like taken out of that then because they can't hear you? Is it the physical location? Okay, so if somebody has I don't want to straw man this, but you really do kind of start to limit things where it's like, what is the actual thing that you're trying to do? Is it better to hear somebody and not be able to sense their presence, or I just trying to get my mind around what you're actually saying when you say these things. That it's, yeah. I'll stop it there.
I've got here's kind of a layer that I'm gonna get a little bit ethereal and spiritual for a second, but just hang with me. All right. There is a passage of scripture where the Apostle Paul talks about how he wishes he could be with some of the believers, but he can't. And being in prison, I mean, that's pretty obvious. And so he says that he will be with them in spirit. Now, what in the world does that mean? Man, I don't know. But I do believe that God and the Holy Spirit transcends physical space. He created space, he created time. And anyone that has prayed with anyone else in a chat room feels what I'm talking about, where distance doesn't matter. You feel the prayers of people because there is something spiritual and transcendent going on. And just hang with me for a little bit. If it is true that we are human spirits ministering to each other, using a layer of abstraction, our physical bodies to make that happen. If you're doing that in the VR space, it's just one more layer of abstraction. That's all it is. At the end of the day, we have spirits that are ministering to spirits. And we have the Holy Spirit that's within us ministering and transcending and doing groanings that can't be uttered. There is a mystical aspect of this that if you limit church to just a physical proximity, you're missing out on the mystery that is ministering in the Spirit and even fellowship in the Spirit. And I think that there is, if we are really eternal souls having a physical experience right now, then it is not that different to have another type of virtual, and I hesitate to even use that word because at the end of the day, the spiritual realm is real, it's not virtual. But if you have real spirits ministering to real spirits, who cares what the intermedium is? Whether it's physical proximity or a VR chat, who cares?
Yeah.
Because I am ministering to another person, another soul, another spirit, whether I'm using physical avatars or digital ones. I don't know that it really matters. One of the interesting things that I do find about the scriptures that you shared, Jade, are two things. In the one scripture, Jesus says, anyone, 2 or 3 are gathered in my name. The in my name part is what we forget. We get all fixated on the gathering when, could this be a gathering, what we're doing right now? I think so. In my name, it doesn't say who are gathered in physical proximity or gathered in the same room. And then you get back to what I was talking about originally about being with someone in spirit. I think there's something to that. I don't know all of the theological ramifications of that, but if we limit ourselves to just physical proximity for ministry, we're going to miss out on a lot of ministry that we could potentially do, and using a lot of tools that we could be using. Now, I say that, and I have a question that I want to pose to the group that is in the second passage that you referenced, Jay, in Acts 2. And that is the breaking of bread, which for a lot of churches, especially in a traditional type of atmosphere, fellowship and breaking of bread together are kind of one and the same, where I don't think they really are, but there's something to be said there. When someone sits down and eats a meal with someone, it feels like, even in a spiritual sense, that something unlocks. And any of you that are familiar with like the bless method, or even in the way that Jesus in his transcended spiritual state after being resurrected from the dead, when he broke bread with the disciples, that's when their eyes were opened and they realized, oh, this is Jesus. There again, I think there's something to breaking bread with people and sharing a meal with people that is a little bit more difficult to achieve in the digital space. And I'm not talking about fellowship. I'm talking about the breaking of bread piece that many times gets mixed in with fellowship and can unlock deeper forms of fellowship. And I don't really have the answer to this. And the breaking of bread piece is what I would love to pose to the group. Has any of you guys shared a meal digitally? Because that seems to be part of the Christian experience too.
Yeah. I mean, all of that, like, awesome. I think that's what you're saying is so good for people that don't think about, especially for people that don't use online regularly, who haven't ever thought about communicating with somebody in an online setting, that don't see it as spirits to spirits, as an actual, because a lot of people don't think about it that way, but people that are online that use their avatar as the way to communicate with people, I mean, for them, that feels that maybe they're more open in that setting than they would be even in a physical where they would just shut down. And it's not really, I've seen that time and time again.
Oh yeah, me too.
So Jason, yeah, I'd ask kind of the same question I'm going to always ask, but like, why? Like, what is it about breaking bread that there's a piece there? There's obviously something, like you said, maybe it's going deeper with fellowship, or maybe it's that in sharing experiences that unlocks something. Is it the actual food itself? Is it the action of pulling bread apart that unlock, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I'm guessing not, but my point is, there is you have to really wonder what it is before, because anytime that we take something and we say this specific thing for this reason, but if we can't apply a reason to it, unless it's, I mean, God says, do this thing, and then you don't ask me a reason why, just do it, then okay, you right. Just do it, and so that there's that balance of, is this something that is commanded, that he says pull bread apart when you're together, is this a command, or is it something that he's telling you, think about why are you doing this, why pull bread apart, what is the reason for it? And I maybe I'm reading this verse wrong, but my feeling is that there's a why by what is it, what are we actually doing when we do this, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I think there is something primal about sharing a meal with someone that you just don't do that with people that you don't care about. And because of that primal nature, I don't know where it comes from. Maybe God put that within us. I mean, he could have made us where, we could be like plants and we don't need to eat at all, but he made us on purpose to have to eat, and he made us with one mouth so that when we're stuffing our face, we can't really talk and we have to listen to somebody. I mean, there's some very basic elemental things where I think God was very intentional in the way that he did it. And I think one of the only ways that we could approximate that, and by the way, just a parenthesis, many of the expressions of the prevailing church don't do this either, right? We don't break bread together either. So I think one of the opportunities that we have in the digital space is to pioneer maybe a new expression of breaking bread. And I use that as just a metaphor for sharing a meal. But one of the ways that I've seen it done and is to just set up a video chat while you're eating with someone else who's in a video chat while they're eating, and you're seeing their face and you're talking with them, and you're not physically sharing your own food. Yeah, like you are right now. Like you're not physically sharing your own food. And I think there's something that is helpful in that as well, that if you were to dissect and say, okay, there is a spiritual discipline of sharing, of being generous with what you have that is important, that in the digital space we need to be intentional about. But I think there's another aspect of just being able to talk to one another. And if we're eating together, even if it's over a video chat, it feels like something is different than when we're just talking.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that is, but it's there.
Well, when you're breaking bread, your defenses are down, right? I mean, right. It's like the whole thing culturally. Why we shake hands is so that our right hands are busy, not holding our guns or our knives. And so shaking hands is what breaks down the defenses. And Jade, if in the podcast audience has no idea, but Jade, if you could pass that box of cereal over here, that would be awesome. I would love to back out on that because he's Golden Grams. Yeah, he's eating Golden Grams over there on his side. But there's you release those defense mechanisms. There's a lot of intimacy when it comes to sitting around, drinking coffee, breaking bread together, sharing a meal with that. Honestly, I feel that defense mechanism is down as a general rule over Zoom or virtual communications anyway, because for me, the webcam and the TV monitor, the computer monitor I'm literally looking at this moment is that allows for that intimacy of it. I don't have to have my defense mechanisms up talking to Jason Morris because I know Jason Morris is not going to stab me with his knife. And so like I can be relaxed in that scenario. Joey, a little sketchy, maybe something could happen there in time, only time will tell. But I'm not face to face with him. So once again, yeah, he knows people. We all know people. Okay, so there's this opportunity we have to embrace wholeheartedly with that. This is great. I love it. That breaking the bread though, sharing that meal virtually, I've done that. Honestly, for me, it's been more out of I'm so busy, I haven't eaten. I think I did it this week. I literally was like eating leftover dinner from last night when I was in a meeting with somebody on Zoom. I don't know that I went into that moment, thinking, hey, let this be a moment of intimacy. And the guy I was with probably wouldn't have appreciated the intimacy either. But maybe that's something that I need to consider into the future. How do we get more intimate online without being weird? Because that's not what I mean. But Jake, did you have something else?
Yeah. So the reason I ask is because I think that's something that we should look at. Like it is something we need to figure out is why for those things. And if my gut reaction is the things that you're saying are right, that there is that you're talking, a lot of it, honestly, I think it's a cultural thing that at the time, breaking bread would have been kind of the time to really talk about things, go throughout the week, have experiences. For me today, I've said it's difficult for me to imagine what my relationships with other people would be like if there wasn't video games. Like I don't know how other people do it. I mean, maybe they watch Netflix together, maybe they go to the movies together, and those are experiences. It's difficult at movies because you can't really talk to one another, right? So it's a cool experience. You think about remember that time we went to the movies together? Remember that time that we went to the mall together? Okay, cool. Like we can talk at the mall and we can have shared experiences and so on. But I mean, man, video games are just so great for that because I'm in a voice channel with a bunch of people. I see them, and we're talking about life while we're running, down into battle, you know, or whatever the heck it is. And that experience, I get to know people very, very well. I just went to Japan with a bunch of my friends. There are 9 friends went to Japan together. 4 of them I had never met in person. We'd only played video games together. And I'll tell you what, those 4, I know better, have better connections than the other people that I just had physically, that were in my proximity, that I went to church with, were in my small group even, because man, I'm hanging out with these guys 6 days out of the week or whatever. And these guys that I physically hang out with, I only saw once or twice a week at small group, you know? So,
you know, you touched on something, Jake, that I think is very important to highlight, is just the amount of sheer time that you're spending with these people. Like if we were to limit fellowship to a 1 hour a week thing, we're missing out on so much opportunity, where even if we had a 1 hour and a small group, okay, 3 or 4 hours max for the week, man, you're probably pulling that off in a day with some of your good friends online.
Well, and that's
how much closer is your relationships because of that?
And that's actually one of the advantages I see to the digital world is, you know, we look at the scriptures, it's gathering daily, do not give up gathering daily. And I look at our world right now and it's like, we're always so busy that digital, I think, is the way to really garner that fellowship, which is what Jake was talking about. I mean, it's like, even those half-hour, 45-minute conversations make a big difference. However, you know, one of those statistics, you know, going back to Jake's why, is one of those statistics of, and at least for me as a father, this is kind of one of those paramount things, is they show that children who eat meals around a table with their parents have better relation skills, have better interaction skills, have better connection with their family, which gives them greater stability in life. So that's where kind of one of those big struggles that we're going to have, I think, digitally with fellowship. And I think breaking the bread is an analogy or a symbolism of that exact scenario. And I don't, as much as I want it to, I don't think digital will get all the way there. But a lot of the barriers that keep us from being intimate will be removed digitally because, as Jake said, hey, I know these 4 guys really well. And I'm going to guess, Jake, you can, you know, chime in or not, but I'm going to guess that when you ate with them and spent time with them, it was even deeper because you didn't have to go through all the surface garbage anymore.
yeah, I mean, I think it definitely was a different, there's a different there. It's not fully the same. There is something different about meeting physically in a location with somebody. I don't want to diminish that because I think it's important, you know, like we have bodies for a reason. But I like the specific example that I think I got from Todd, but it might have been actually from Pat, but he said something like, could you get married online? Yes. Could you never meet your wife ever and you just only meet online and you're always online for the rest of your life? Yeah. And that might even be okay, but there's probably something, you know, and I probably don't need to go very much further than that of why for some people that would be very not fulfilling for them. Everybody that's married just nods their heads. All right, not me because I'm not married. But there is something, you know, there's something different about being in a physical location and being able to hug somebody and all that. So, but the thing that I think that you're hitting on is not even just time, but if we're looking at physical church, is the church daily meeting with people in the church to eat for lunch? Like, no, maybe never. Some people after Sunday, they will go after church to meet and do that. You know, I have a group of friends that I go to do that with sometimes regularly. But it's not like it's that's why I ask what the why is, because okay, that's something that we should put in there. Then if meeting physically, I have relationships with people online that our relationships have gotten a lot better. When we met online, talked for like a couple months or whatever, and then we met in person. And maybe that's a thing, is that physical or online exclusive church could say, all right, if that's really actually important because there's something different that unlocks in our relationships online after that, well, then maybe we do every 6 months, there's a meetup and you break bread together. It's a big dinner, everybody meets. And then after that, you go back to online because you can do that daily, but every 6 months we're going to do this thing. And I think there's definitely something to be said for that. I totally agree.
Yeah, and that meetup, actually, that's something that, as I'm looking at designing digital churches and working with them, I actually think that meetup's important. And I look at Saddleback, Jay Cranda. Jay's looking at doing the meetups with their house churches. He's talking about doing them every 6 to 18 months. I think he's wrestling with that, trying to encourage everybody coming together, and then him coming in and doing that. Even as I was producing house churches and micro locations, there were times where we would fly everybody in who were doing the micro locations to Christ Fellowship Miami, just to encourage, to cast vision, to work towards that. Because ultimately, you're right. There is something that can be gained, can be learned, can be experienced in that physical space. And Jade, I will forever use the marriage analogy. That is awesome. It was a little weird coming from a single guy, I gotta admit, but I think there's totally a lot of weight in that. So thank you for sharing that. Hey, and this was the easy one. Like, this was supposed to be the throwaway. Let's just move on. And we ended up spending a lot of time on the easy one. So that's awesome. All right, so we're going to wrap with fellowship. I want to thank these guys for jumping on the podcast. Jason Morris, Ian Kirk, Joey Santos, Jade Earhart. Man, you guys are great. By the way, they did this. They gave a couple hours for this conversation on a Saturday. They were so passionate about having this conversation about digital church. We've got 2 of the parts done. We are going to part 3. We're going to publish that here in a little bit. So episode 66 is actually going to be Biblical Functions of a Digital Church Part 3. Look for it here in a couple days. But for now, we're going to wrap. For the crowd, Jason, Ian, Joey, and Jate, this is Jeff for the Church Digital. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time here on the podcast. You all have a day.